Throughout America's history, there has always been discrimination against different races, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. Through hard work and determination, many minorities and activists have overcome difficult obstacles that were placed in their way by racist Americans.
In 1846, Mexico and America went to war. In 1848, America won California, New Mexico, and Texas from Mexico in the Mexican-American War. After the war, thousands of Mexicans who still lived in the United States received full citizenship. Although thousands were made citizens of the United States, Mexican Americans remained discriminated against. Many lost their land to unfamiliar American laws and swindlers. After the war, white people in the South adopted the same ideas, beliefs, and stereotypes they had about black people and used them on Mexican Americans. They would say things like they were lazy and that they didn't like to work, and although considered American, Mexican Americans were treated as second-class citizens for over 100 years to come. In the early 1900s, discrimination against Mexican Americans remained strong. They were considered by law as equal as a white person, but they were not treated as equal as a white person. Schools in the South would treat the Mexican children unequal, making them use outhouses outside of the schools while the white children would have inside plumbing. Segregation of Mexican Americans continued on in restaurants, movie theaters, restrooms, neighborhoods, and even cemeteries. During World War II, over 300,000 Mexican Americans served their country. When they returned home believing they had earned the right to be a first-class citizen, they were mistaken. Nothing had changed in the South, and decorated war heroes continued to be turned away from restaurants, theaters, schools, and even cemeteries. In 1949, a soldier by the name of Private Felix Longoria, a war hero killed in action, returned home to his family in Three Rivers, Texas. On return of his body, the only funeral parlor in the small town refused to bury Felix because it would upset the white people. This was the very turning point that began a civil rights movement for the Mexican Americans. Throughout the South, Felix Longoria's story spread, and activist groups such as the League of Latin American Citizens and Mexican Veterans felt strong that this was wrong and it was time for a change. Following an intense campaign by many veterans and activists, Felix Longoria was buried in the Arlington National Cemetery. This was only the beginning. Many knew that in order to enforce major change, a case must be brought to the Supreme Court. One such activist, by the name of Gus Garcia, was a veteran and a lawyer, and very important for the Mexican Americans in the South. From 1949 to 1951, he won numerous court cases on a state level in Texas. He won a court order to stop segregation in schools, as well as prevent white neighborhoods from banning Mexican Americans from buying houses.
August 4th, 1951, in Edna, Texas, a farmer named Joe Espinoza was in the same cafe as a man named Pedro Hernandez, a field worker with a bad leg. People report an argument between the two. A witness stated hearing Joe tell Pedro, "No woman is going to look at a cripple like you." Then Pedro left the cafe and returned with a gun and shot Joe Espinoza. Pedro was then arrested for the murder of Joe Espinoza. Pedro Hernandez's mom went to the well-known lawyer Gus Garcia. He decided to take on the murder charge. Knowing this could be the case, he was waiting for it to take to the Supreme Court for Mexican American civil rights. On October 8, 1951, at a court hearing, Pedro entered a plea. But before the judge could do anything, Gus Garcia objected the whole court proceeding, stating the jury did not represent his peers because it was an all-white jury without Mexican Americans. Pedro was later found guilty, and after a couple of appeals at the state level, Gus Garcia and his team of lawyers were able to take the case to the Supreme Court as Hernandez versus Texas. 3 years later, on January 11, 1954, the Supreme Court case Hernandez versus Texas was held. Gus Garcia and his team delivered an eloquent and charismatic speech asking them to appeal the 14th Amendment to include Mexican Americans as a group. The justices were moved and compelled to rule for the Mexican Americans, making this a civil rights victory for the people. After the ruling, Mexican Americans were to be represented by their peers throughout the judicial system.
In 2011, Mexican Americans in America now make up 26% of the population. New generations are growing up in a more culturally diverse and accepting era. Although minorities have made huge strides to overcome diversity, it still exists in certain corners. During an interview held on November 11, 2012, questions were asked concerning racism and stereotypes in the 21st century. 3 Mexican Americans responded. Have you encountered discrimination and stereotypes as a Mexican American? A 37-year-old male Mexican American responded, "Working as a gardener, some of the people that I had done houses for had treated me like dirt. They downgraded me because of my race. It's a stereotype for a Mexican to work in a labor job like a gardener." A 22-year-old male Mexican American responded, "I started school without knowing English. It made it really hard to stay at the same pace and level as the other kids. It was harder to communicate and get through classes. At the time that I had went to school, they didn't have as many Spanish-speaking teachers available for the kids who only spoke Spanish. I felt outcasted because I wanted to talk to some of the kids, but a lot of them didn't speak Spanish. A lot of people also downgrade us when we talk in Spanish in public because they think because we're speaking in another language than English that we're automatically talking bad about them." A 36-year-old female Mexican American responded, "At one point, jobs were hard to find and we had a lot of things to pay for. Insurance was hard to maintain when we needed food or clothes before an insurance payment. I felt very embarrassed trying to get Medi-Cal because a lot of people look at you like you are just mooching and being lazy. I felt undermined sometimes, but I kept faith knowing that I needed this for my kids. They're what mattered to me the most."
Although diversity still exists, many different people, white and colored, have risen above the cliché of racism.
More and more Americans are finding common ground with one another through knowledge and cultural competency. It is each individual's job to make sure to maintain a tolerant and acceptant state of mind.
Our country of America was built by ancestors like each and every one of us, and every one of us deserves to live the American life.